What if horses were given a choice? Would they carry us?
If you've ever wondered whether horses enjoy being ridden, or how to build a relationship with your horse that's based on mutual respect and understanding, then this is an episode you won't want to miss. Welcome to today's episode of Curious Equestrian with me, Kate Wensley, where we explore Elsa Sinclair's groundbreaking approach to horse training. Join us as Elsa shares her journey from the inception of her film, Taming Wild, to developing freedom-based training. Elsa offers unique insights that challenge traditional horsemanship and invites us to rethink our connections with these creatures. This episode promises to enlighten, inspire, and maybe even change how you interact with horses. So let's get started and discover the lessons horses can teach us, with Elsa as our guide.
Hi Elsa, how are you today?
I'm doing fabulous. Thank you, Kate. It's great to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have you. And I've been looking forward to this one, I must admit. Long-time fan and watcher of your movies. So yeah, it's a real treat for me personally to be able to speak with you. And I'm hoping that we can share a lot with the listeners today. So that will be fabulous. I'll get right to it. So how did you begin your journey with horses?
My journey with horses began very, very young. I'm actually the youngest of 6 children.
Oh, wow.
And my mother's always had horses, but she gave them all away when I was born. And we didn't have any horses until I was 7. So of all the children, I was the only one that had to beg for a pony.
Oh, that's rough.
Yes. So finally, when I was 7 years old, we took a couple of ponies in retirement. They're in my first movie, actually, so people can see me riding them. And they were fabulous. They taught me the ropes. And my mother's variety of teaching kids to ride was we had to ride on the lunge line without holding on at the walk, the trot, and the canter. We just showed that we had our balance.
Okay.
And then we were given the reins and she would take off on the pony in front of us and we would gallop through the woods jumping fences. And it was just hold on.
Brilliant. I love it. I think I'd like your mother. I think that balance is that key, isn't it? And what a wonderful introduction to have horses in your life. I'm quite disappointed. I'm obviously horsey and I have 3 children and none of them have that interest. So, yeah, other way around for me. But
yeah, well, the joke was my mom had to have a 6 before she had one that stuck with it. None of my siblings are involved.
Yeah,
so
I don't think I
maybe just didn't have enough.
Yeah, I'm not that dedicated to it, clearly. So what prompted you to make the movie Taming Wild? And for anyone who hasn't seen it, I suggest you go and check it out and we'll pop a link on at the end of the podcast as well.
I was teaching and I had a student that asked me a question that just wouldn't leave my consciousness. And it was a very simple question. And it was just, do you think horses like being ridden? And my answer at the time was, yes, I think they love being ridden. But then she dug a little deeper and she said, do you think they really would like being ridden if they knew they had a choice? And I didn't know the answer to that question. And I thought, has anybody ever run an experiment where that was a valid basis for the experiment? I know a lot of people do food reward training, and that sort of seems like a choice. But when we hold the control to all the food, all of a sudden, maybe it's less of a choice. And so I dreamed up this project that I thought I was going to do when I retired. I thought I was going to do it when I was 65 years old and I had time, but then I couldn't stop talking about it. I was going to adopt a Mustang off the range. It was going to be a full adult who'd lived a full life with stallions and babies and knew what an independent life was. And I was going to keep it with other horses so it had all the friends it wants. I was going to make sure it had all the food it wanted so that it wasn't relying on me for food. And then I would just show up as a partner and ask it, if we spend enough time together, is riding something that you would want to do?
Mm-hmm.
And I couldn't stop talking about the project. And so, my friends, of course, said, well, when are you going to do this? And I was like, oh, I don't have time. I'm a single parent and I'm busy and I have a full career. And But nonetheless, it all sort of came together. I am working on the book right now. The book will be released in November.
Oh, brilliant.
And the book is going to fill in all the pieces that the movie couldn't include. When I did the project, I had a wonderful woman filming for me. And she only filmed 1 day per month for a year. So that movie is really just little snippet of what happened during that year. And so the book will fill in sort of some of the pieces that happened in between that, and give a broader story. So I'm excited about that. I'm working with the publisher right now.
Yeah, well, as a fellow author, I get your excitement. And as a reader, I can't wait. Did you, when you set out and you obviously had this idea niggle away at you, did you think it would end up being such a long project? Which, some people might say actually a year isn't that long to undertake what you've just described. But did you have any idea in your mind of what the time frame for this would be? Or did you really think about was there anything that really popped up that you thought didn't really consider that at the beginning?
Yeah, so I thought of it as a novelty project. I thought that we were going to spend this year and it probably wasn't going to work. And then I'd go back to normal training and I'd train this horse the normal way and we'd all go back to our normal lives. And I just had to try it. The thing that surprised me was how much better it worked than it even was in my imagination. I learned more in that 1 year than I had in the 30 years previous. And that was addictive. It was absolutely addictive. But even once I was done, I thought, I am probably the only person in the world that's going to want to do this because it's so slow. It's like watching paint dry and it's very focused. It's a lot of being aware of details, showing the horses that you see the details and that you can respond to them in the way that's best for them. And I was fascinated and I was going to do it for the rest of my life, which surprised me. But I didn't think anyone else was going to. And then people started asking me, well, can you just teach us a little bit of what you did? And I said, I can, but it takes a really long time and a lot of focus. But I'll show you what I did. And the lessons I started teaching, people started saying that, horses that didn't have any friends all of a sudden had friends. Horses that were narcoleptic and had problems sleeping, were all of a sudden, they were catching them on camera sleeping when they didn't sleep before. So there were all these sort of problems that were resolving themselves from the training that I was doing that I didn't expect. And then it became really addictive for people because these were problems that most people don't really know how to solve. So slowly it snowballed and I had more and more and more people saying, well, just teach me a little of it. Even if I don't do the whole thing, maybe just a little bit of this work will help my horse too. And that's been my experience, that you don't have to give up all of your tools and all your food rewards and be careful that food is readily available and all those things that I did carefully. You can do pieces of the work and the relationship gets much better.
Do you think that's because maybe it's the first time we actually acknowledge that it's a relationship? And what I mean by that is that most horse owners and lovers and anyone that does it, let's face it, it's not for the faint of heart. You love your horse and you want them to love you back in a very human way. We have those feelings. But for horses, obviously, the meaning and like you say, the way they communicate, the way they interact as a herd, the way they have that security and that gratitude and all the fuzzies from a relationship are very different to how we try and mimic it. So by actually sort of being in that moment and going, actually, how I experience things, how I learn isn't the same way as you. And for people, that must be really difficult because we're not great at change at the best of times.
Yeah. What my students love to say, that once you see this stuff, you can't unsee it. But if you haven't seen it before, it takes a bit to wrap your head around how does my horse feel understood? I believe that bonding, that sort of pair bond that we seek, it comes from giving attention and getting attention. But giving attention to a horse is sometimes very different than we think it is. So we often want to give attention by scratching them on the wither or kissing them on the nose or giving them a hug. And for many horses, that isn't exactly the way they want attention. So learning to tailor our gift of attention in a way that actually suits the horse in front of us can be a bit of a learning curve.
It's a bit like dating, isn't it? On a whole other level, but it's that, that really personal relationship and that, like you say, that pair bond that we want with them, but they all don't play the same instrument the same way. So you have to sort of get in tune with who you're faced with. So I bet it's quite exciting. Your training is freedom-based. Is that correct, Elsa? Correct me if I get that wrong. Can you tell us a bit more about, the courses you run and the clinics and what you offer, what the demand has created, basically, off the back of your experience?
Absolutely. So I teach freedom-based training. And the idea is that those are a contradiction in terms, because if you're really free, you can do anything you want. But if you're trained, I can count on you to do what I expect. And so it's the contradiction between those two terms that is really beautiful and interesting. And really that comes down to the giving and the getting attention. So in freedom, we really give the horses attention. And if they don't like the variety of attention we're giving, they just walk away. Like they can make it very clear it doesn't suit them. And then we have to figure out, well, how do we give attention in a way that they don't want to walk away, that they do want to maintain that interaction? The training then comes in when we help them learn how to regulate their emotions. So we train them to focus on things that make them feel better. And when we train their nervous system and their emotional regulation, they start to become more and more cooperative naturally. So horses want to be cooperative. The only reason they wouldn't be cooperative is if they feel overwhelmed. They feel overwhelmed when they hyperfixate on problems instead of looking for solutions. So the training comes in helping them use their nervous system to look for solutions instead of hyperfixating on problems. If I can help them regulate their nervous system, I actually can depend on them to be quite cooperative in a way that doesn't take away their freedom. So that's what I teach. When I travel around the world, I'm away from home more than 6 months of the year, and I teach 4-day clinics. So it takes people about 4 days to wrap their head around what it is that we're doing. The first day is all about understanding the horse as an individual. Who are they and how are they different from every other horse there? The second day is about safety. How do we help them feel more safe in their skin, in their space, in the relationship? The third day is understanding a horse's hierarchy of needs, how their needs are different from human needs, and how we build a bond, understanding that our needs and their needs are a little different, but we can connect through that. And then the fourth day is about taking all that information into the real world. What will you actually be doing with this horse? What do you expect of them? What can you give them? What can they give you? And how do we balance that all out? So that's what I teach in a 4-day clinic. For people who are really interested, I teach an online course that is 18 weeks long. And it is exactly the same stuff we do in the 4-day clinic. It's just deeper. The actual physical work is fairly simple. There's 10 million different ways I can explain it. 10 million different perspectives we can look at it from. And it is fascinating. And as I was saying, once you see it, you can't unsee it. And you realize that horses are communicating all the time. And we can communicate back in very concrete, logical ways that make everybody feel heard and understood.
Do you think that it's accessible to all? Anyone involved with horses as well? Is it something that we can, because I was chatting to someone recently about the concept of feel, and obviously that can be quite an elusive concept in and of itself in horsemanship. But with something like this, is it something a bit more, I won't say tangible, because obviously it's more experimental, I suppose. You're putting something out and seeing what you get back. There's a bit more of a biofeedback element to it. So in that
Yes.
regard, is it easier to comprehend? Can most people kind of get the gist and gain something of value from it?
Yes. So this idea of feel is something that goes around the horse world. And it's something you just sort of learn by experience. And you just have to feel it. And it's very intangible the way it's talked about. I talk about feel as just knowing what to do. Feel and timing is knowing what to do and when to do it. And I honestly think timing is more important than feel. If you know when to do something, your horse will start to work with you and they will teach you what needs to be done. But if you're constantly talking over the top of each other and you can't hear each other, it's very difficult to develop feel. So I predominantly teach timing first. And then once we are taking turns talking and we are actually listening to each other, then we can develop an understanding of feel, what to do so the relationship gets increasingly better, not worse.
So it's very positive and solution focused. It sounds like you could probably benefit just as people with other people and implement these skills. It's interesting, just going back to you saying about regulating the nervous system. There's been a lot of discussion recently about how that's linked to balance as well. I've heard a couple of great horsemen discuss how balance is intrinsically connected to emotional stability. Do you agree with that? Have you seen that yourself?
I absolutely agree with that. Yeah. When we are dysregulated, and I'm talking about horses, but it also refers back to people. So I'm only certified to teach about horses, but people find that it does relate back to our own experience. But when we're dysregulated, survival is the only goal. So survival takes precedence over every other decision. And it's very difficult to have good balance if you're just trying to survive.
Yeah. I mean, from a very basic physical concept, if you're unable to think and overwhelmed and just, like you say, trying to cope in that moment, then the last thing you're going to worry about is how you're carrying yourself. And that goes for any of us. But that's really interesting. What was the biggest lesson for you personally that you learned from the first film and documentary?
I think the biggest lesson was you don't know everything, Elsa. I really thought I was pretty good at my job, and I thought I knew a lot of things. And as I said, I learned more in that 1 year than I had in all of my years horse training combined. And it was because most of horse training is getting the horse to pay attention to us, getting the horse to do what we want. And there is some learning involved in how you get them to do what you want. But then when you switch it around and you say, how do I learn what makes the relationship better, even if it has nothing to do with what I want, what just makes the relationship better? Like the learning becomes exponentially huge. And I really thought my experiment would just add, a little bit of frosting to all the things I already knew. And it just actually turned my whole world upside down in a way that I am eternally grateful for.
You just baked a whole new cake instead.
Exactly.
So what keeps you motivated? I mean, obviously, it's something that you're passionate about and you've very much gone down the rabbit hole with. As you said, it's taking you places that you didn't expect. But is it the changes in the horses? And what I mean by that is there must be a change, that moment of when they feel they're actually being heard and listened to. A bit of a light bulb moment in the equine sense. Maybe not quite that literal or that fast, but you kind of catch that drift? Or is it people? I mean, some people come into this, like you say, it's that dream of having that connection with your horse. And we live in a very fast, very digital, a very instant world. And actually, as you say, when you're busy with work and family and everything else that's going on, taking that time to really slow down and be in the moment and actually learn the lessons that you both need to learn. Is it rewarding seeing the skeptics? Because even though you want it so desperately, there's a part of your brain going, well, it can't possibly work because I'm too busy or I'm too tired or I'm too this. It must be rewarding to see it in both human and horse. But what motivates you to keep everyone going as well as yourself on this journey?
It's actually the quieter things. And I didn't expect this when I started, but it's the horse that everybody labeled as dangerous. You should sell it. Nobody should handle it. It's going to be a problem. 3 years down the road, people say, how'd you find such a beautiful, calm horse that's so nice all the time? How did you manage to buy that? And the owner going, I didn't buy that. We created it.
Yeah.
It's not the dramatic moments. It's the quiet moments where people go, oh, it must have always been that easy for you. And you just go, oh, you have no idea. You have no idea how many stories have been told between where we started and this thing that looks like it's always been easy. So that's the piece that really keeps me going. And also, as I've been doing this for 15 years now, and I get snippets where I hear back, people will say, well, I heard this theory, and they don't know where it came from, but it was my theory. And I live for those moments where this is starting to become normalized. I dream of a world where people go, well, of course I watch their ears to know how well they're receiving the situation. Of course I watch their focus changes. Of course I notice the tension in their muscles. Of course I notice. I want that to become normal.
Mm-hmm.
Once upon a time, we all jumped horses leaning way back over the cantle of their saddle. And then there was the Caprilli seat. And we don't call it the Caprilli seat anymore. We just all jump horses by getting forward over their balance point. And I think that we can develop horsemanship to a point where everybody just listens to their horse because that's what you do.
And
that's what keeps me going.
And I suppose it's spreading that, like you say, it's funny. It's like as if you're a writer and you have someone quote something back to you and you're like, well, I wrote that. It's very odd. But yeah, I get exactly what you mean about, those theories coming back. But I suppose it's also, you've been doing this a long time. And then the proof's in the pudding, isn't it? That it's not just a gimmick. It's not just a whim. It has real practical, emotional, physiological benefits for both horse and human. And it doesn't stop horses having, a ridden life and a good competition or whatever anyone wants to do with their horse. It just means it's actually a relationship and there's a conversation going on. Is that the kind of layman's version of it?
Yes. Yeah. So the reports that I get back are, if people take 5 or 10 minutes to have a conversation in freedom with the horse before they tack up for their dressage test, they tend to get better scores. If after they untack their horse, they take 5 or 10 more minutes to have a little physical interaction with them where they really listen to their horse and their horse listens to them, their ride the next day goes better. And that's the piece that I feel like I can give the world. I may be the extremist that says, I'm never going to put a halter on my horse. And there's no carrots when they do the correct behavior. They're just going to do it because they feel good doing it. And that's an extreme point of view. But the things that I learned from that, I can give to the people who maybe just want to take 5 or 10 minutes to improve their relationship a little bit before they get on with their day.
Yeah, and ultimately it makes things better for the horse. Here in the UK, we have a lot going around social licensing. So it's really looking at, how horses' welfare, how they take, if it's good for them, not just done to them. Um, and for me, the freedom-based technique, I think things like this are a real gateway to understanding practically in sort of real life relationship with your horse, rather than trying to change the world for all horses at once. You can change your little corner of the world for the horse that you have. And just acknowledging that you're with a sentient feeling being. It's not just a machine. There are partners. For anyone curious about this, if people wanted to get in contact with you, you do lives on Facebook, don't you?
So every Tuesday, every Tuesday I do something called Tea with Elsa. And I just sit and drink a cup of tea and talk about what I'm thinking that week. So a lot of people tune in that way. I have a Patreon group and people can join there. I've got 6 years of weekly videos there. So any subject you can imagine, you type it in, you can probably find a video where I've addressed something about that subject. And if not, you can send me a message and I probably can make a video about it. So the Patreon group is sort of a wealth of information. And you can find all of that on my website. And then there is also some opportunity for virtual coaching. So if you go to my website, I have hours, usually only a couple each month when I'm home, but I do sort of sit face to face with people and talk to them about whatever is happening for them and their horse too.
That's really cool. One other thing I wanted to ask you about is fear. And not just in horses, but in people. And obviously, we know that can be a barrier in the traditional sense when people are riding and, people have been told, oh, just get on with it. Or they become so paralyzed with fear that they don't move forward with their relationship, either in the saddle or out of the saddle with their horse. Is this something that can be addressed through the freedom-based training as well?
Yes, it can. I joke that freedom-based training is probably the slowest training method on earth, so it's not going to be addressed overnight. But the reason for fear is because we have evidence that we should be afraid. And when we're told to just get on with it, we're told to ignore the evidence that our body thinks is very important. So the way that I go about that, and this is fear in horses as well, because we have horses with the same issue, is we start to develop a remarkable library of evidence or reasons to be brave and confident and happy and enjoying and all of the things that are the opposite of fear. And we build a bank account of all of that incredible evidence that this is going to go well. And once we build enough evidence that this is going to go well, then we train the nervous system to choose to focus on the evidence that this will go well versus the evidence that this is going to go terribly. But we need to give it something to focus on before we can take its focus away from that defensive place of being afraid. Being afraid has a reason.
Do you think horses are affected by like if a rider falls or they fall? Personally, I had an accident last year with my horse. He just tripped on some ground in school. He tried to save himself and he didn't. I went up and over through the left-hand shoulder and I broke 4 ribs and punctured my lung. He did everything he could to not roll on me. But it really affected him. It took a long time, apart from the physical side of it for me, it took a long time for me to get to a point where I actually I just literally said to him, I know this happened to you as well. And he let out the biggest, woof. But looking back, I can see that he was just holding almost like that responsibility, which sounds like a very humanistic way of saying it, but it's like he almost, I won't say blamed himself, but he was definitely hanging on to what happened. Do you find that horses can have that kind of reaction to trauma?
Absolutely. It may not be quite as anthropomorphic as we think it is, but sometimes that's a good way for us to understand it. I do think they hold on to experiences. If they've had an experience and they hyper focus on it, they're going to really try and hard to be defensive against it happening again in the future. So anything bad that happens, they're going to guard against it unless we give them something else to think about. And so a lot of the emotional regulation I work is teaching the horse that they have a choice of where to focus. And so some of them will hyper focus on the problem and drive themselves insane because it's a problem they can't fix, such as something that happened in the past. It's already happened. It's already done. It's already gone. If you can teach them that they are capable of switching focus to the solutions to that problem, such as being very careful when you walk, being very, very aware of the ground changes, being very alert and interested and curious and engaged when carrying a rider. There's a whole bunch of things you could focus on that are the solutions to the problem versus focusing on the problem. And this is what emotional regulation is. And this is sort of the basis for a lot of the work that I do with horses, is teaching them where to focus so that they feel like there is hope and good things are coming. They don't just always have to defend against the bad things that they're afraid of.
Yeah, and I bet that applies to a lot of people as well. Because, as you say, explaining it in a very human way, an anthropological way, that's how we can get stuck, isn't it? It's stuck in that moment of time and doom and gloom. So this really feels like it's a process, obviously for the horse, but it's very much a process, a walk that you take together to get to the end result. And it wouldn't be the same if you didn't do it together.
Right. So I really think of it as a bank account. We're going to invest in a lot of good experiences together. We're going to make sure that those settle into the memory. So there's a whole process of getting those to actually be remembered instead of just a fleeting thing that happens. And then once we have this bank account of good experiences, life will happen. There will be accidents. There will be bad things that happen. The question is, how rich is your bank account that you're drawing on? And if you really have a good foundation of good experiences, you're going to bounce back from life as it happens with a lot more grace. We're not going to take away every accident that ever happened. We're just going to build a stability that allows us to navigate them better.
Yeah, it's building that resilience, isn't it? And those coping strategies that aren't really strategies once you get there. They're just how you deal with things, how you deal with life.
Yeah. When I got Myrna, the mare in that first movie, I had to give her vaccinations 3 weeks after I got her from the wild. And I wanted to do it without trapping, without putting a halter on her, without having any food rewards. I was going to stick a needle in her neck and give her vaccinations. And I was terrified. And I did everything I could to build as big a bank account as possible in that first 3 weeks. And then when I went to give her the vaccinations, my hands were shaking. I felt like I was hyperventilating. I was so worried. And she just kept nuzzling my hair and nuzzling my face. And like, she couldn't figure out why I was so worried. And even as I stuck this long, and I messed it up the first time, and then I had to get another needle. And then she just reassured me all the way. She was like, I have no idea why you're so upset, but I'm pretty sure we're going to be okay. And we're going to make it through this.
Because that would be the exact opposite that you'd think. Unless you've experienced that, you prepare yourself for, oh, if I get this wrong, if I mess this up, that's it. It's that pressure, isn't it, that we put on ourselves. Like, this is our one shot to do it. And then there'd be the angst of, once I've done it, has that undone all the, the work, the stuff that's gone in the bank? I think we can be pretty hard on ourselves as horse people with that, that we don't want to ruin it. Yeah, if you've got a good thing, you don't want to ruin it, but you have to kind of go through the stuff that you have to go through. Like you say, life happens, and it's having that faith that what you've put in the bank is actually still going to be there. It's not just going to evaporate with one needle.
Yeah, exactly. And we might spend some of it, but we're not going to spend all of it because we're going to keep adding to it. And even if we spent all of it, we just build it again. We have that capability. And that's what I teach, is I teach people the capability to continually invest in that bank account so that life can happen. And it's not the end of the world.
And also horses are very forgiving, aren't they? I think we forget that sometimes, that they have a bigger capacity for forgiveness than maybe humans do sometimes.
I don't know. I think horses and humans come in lots of varieties. Some humans are very forgiving and some are not. And I think that's also true of horses. Some are very forgiving and some are less forgiving. And so it depends a little bit on which one you've had the experience with. But you can take them all as they are and make something beautiful out of that relationship.
That's so lovely. So this could be an equestrian answer or just a general life answer, Elsa. If you had one piece of advice for our audience, if you just had one message, what would it be?
Become an observer of patterns. So everything you experience and everything your horse experiences comes from a recipe of things that happened. First this happened, then that happened, then that happened, then that happened. So if you have the best day ever, or if you have a nervous breakdown, it is not just the thing that happened right before the best day ever or the nervous breakdown. It is the accumulation of things. What is the pattern that led up to that? And so when we become observers of patterns, we learn to tinker with the patterns until we get more and more of the best days ever. And you want to think of it like a recipe. So if you want to make cookies, it's going to make a difference if you put a lot of butter in or a little butter in, and they're going to taste different. And you're going to experiment. Do I like it with more butter or do I like it with less butter? And that is all a recipe. Everything you experience in life comes from a recipe. And when we don't pay attention, we tend to repeat the same recipe over and over and over again. When we pay attention, we start to tinker with that recipe. And sometimes we'll make it worse and we'll burn the whole thing and we'll go, okay, I don't want to do it that way again. But if you can become an observer of patterns, then you will naturally tinker with the patterns until they come out with a lot of good experiences, whether it's for yourself or within your relationships. So that's the advice that I would give, is become a pattern observer.
That's fabulous advice. And I imagine that takes some self-awareness and bravery as well.
It's easy to repeat the thing you did yesterday. And when you're tired or you're in survival mode, that's the default. You just do what you did yesterday. But as we tone and develop our nervous systems, we learn to make tomorrow better than yesterday was by playing with it.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Well, I'm very excited about you coming over to the UK, Elsa. You're here in May, aren't you? But hopefully I'll get down, come and see you.
I would love to see you there. It's going to be a really good group of students, and I'm so excited to see what the horses teach us. It's always something new and different. The horses are the teachers. I will be there as a translator, as it were, but the horses will dictate exactly what it is that we learn in that clinic.
That's amazing. It'll be great to have a follow-up with you and see what those lessons are for sure. But thank you so much, Elsa.